A burst of laughter rippled through the grand ballroom of the Astral Concordium as its crystalline walls refracted the ambient light into a dazzling kaleidoscope. The vibrancy seemed alive, pulsing with the energy of countless alien dignitaries gathered under one roof. Delegates and dignitaries from across the galaxy filled the space, their varied forms and attires creating a symphony of movement and sound. Princess Kaelira of the Thyralian Empire stood at the edge of the room, her emerald skin glowing faintly beneath the golden coronet nestled in her silvery hair. Though her demeanor was serene, a storm of uncertainty churned within. Kaelira's fingers brushed the intricate embroidery of her ceremonial gown, a subtle gesture to steady herself as she risked a glance at the man standing across the hall. Captain Elias Ward, the human, the so-called ruthless warrior whose reputation had traveled light years ahead of him. He cut an imposing figure in a stark black military uniform, his blue eyes scanning the crowd with cool intensity. A faint scar traced his jawline, adding to his air of enigmatic authority. Whispers followed him wherever he moved, tales of Earth's brutal wars and humans' relentless tenacity amplifying the collective unease. As if sensing her gaze, Elias turned his head. Their eyes locked for a fraction of a second, and a jolt of something sharp and unexpected coursed through Kaelira, leaving her momentarily unsteady. His expression, unreadable but not unkind, held a flicker of curiosity. Her stomach churned. Was he amused by this charade? Did he find her discomfort entertaining? She quickly looked away, struggling to maintain her composure. He is not what I anticipated, Kaelira murmured to Vylan, her chief advisor, whose steady presence was a rare comfort. Vylan's antennae twitched subtly. Humans are full of contradictions, princess. But the Council's will is clear. This alliance must proceed. Kaelira's attention returned to Elias, who now conversed with a group of reptilian Uthari diplomats. His relaxed posture and precise movements belied the ruthless reputation she had been warned about. Yet his piercing gaze and calculated charm hinted at layers she could not yet fathom. The High Chancellor's formal address echoed through the hall, but Kaelira's mind was elsewhere. What kind of man was Elias Ward? Could she trust him to respect her and her people? Her carefully constructed mask of grace cracked momentarily under the weight of these questions. When the Chancellor's speech concluded, Kaelira's heart sank. It was time for the ceremonial introduction. She stepped forward, her movements measured and deliberate despite her inner turmoil. Across the room, Elias mirrored her approach. His stride was confident yet unhurried, his gaze fixed on her with unsettling focus. The tension in the air was palpable. Princess Kaelira, Elias said, his voice deep and resonant. It's an honor to meet you. Kaelira forced a polite smile. Captain Ward. The honor is mutual. He studied her for a moment, and a faint smirk tugged at his lips. You're calmer than I expected. Kaelira's chin lifted slightly. And you're less intimidating than your reputation suggests. Perhaps we've both been misinformed. His smirk deepened into a grin. Perhaps. The brief exchange left Kaelira more unsettled than before. Elias's demeanor was disarming, a blend of confidence and humor that defied her expectations. She couldn't decide if it was a calculated ploy or genuine sincerity. Either way, it threw her off balance. As the evening unfolded, Kaelira couldn't help but observe Elias from a distance. He navigated the crowd with practiced ease, his interactions marked by a surprising warmth. Even the notoriously aloof Uthari seemed to respond to his charm. Was this his strategy, a means to secure alliances? Or was he truly as adaptable as the stories suggested? Kaelira's musings were interrupted when Elias approached her again. Princess, he said, his tone respectful but tinged with amusement. Would you honor me with a dance? The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Refusing him would be a diplomatic faux pas, yet accepting meant stepping into uncharted territory. Summoning her courage, she placed her hand in his. The music swelled, wrapping around them like a tangible force as they moved to the center of the ballroom. Elias's grip was firm, his hand radiating a steady warmth that belied the formality of the moment. His steps were sure and precise, leading her with a confidence that somehow felt both commanding and reassuring. Kaelira's senses sharpened, attuned to every subtle shift, the faint scuff of their shoes on the polished floor, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his breath, and the fleeting glances from the crowd, heavy with unspoken expectations. "You're nervous," he observed quietly. "Not in the slightest," Kaelira replied, though her tone betrayed her. He chuckled softly. "You're not a convincing liar, princess. And you're insufferably observant, Captain," she retorted, though a faint smile touched her lips. "Comes with the territory," he said. "But I'll let you in on something. I'm not exactly thrilled about this arrangement either. Marrying a princess wasn't in my career plans." Kaelira's brow furrowed. "Then why agree to it?" "Because duty doesn't care about personal preferences," he said simply. "I suspect you've learned the same lesson." His words struck a chord, stirring an unwelcome sense of camaraderie. She couldn't deny the truth in them. Their shared predicament made them unlikely allies, bound by the weight of expectation. The dance ended, but the exchange lingered in Kaelira's mind. Was Elias Ward an ally, an adversary, or something in between? Only time would tell. Later that evening, she stood alone on her balcony, the city lights below stretching into infinity. Her thoughts were a tangled weave of doubt and curiosity. Could she find common ground with this human? Would their union bring the peace her people so desperately needed? A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Violin entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Princess, Captain Ward has requested a private audience with the High Council tomorrow morning." Kaelira's heart sank. "Did he say why?" "No," Violin replied. "But it's unusual." A ripple of apprehension coursed through her, tightening her chest. What was Elias planning? Whatever it was, she knew it would change everything. The morning arrived shrouded in a tense stillness that seeped through the grand halls of the astral Concordium. Kaelira dressed meticulously, the ceremonial fabrics draping her like armor against the unknown. Despite the serene facade she forced herself to maintain, her thoughts spiraled into chaos. Captain Elias Ward's request for a private audience with the High Council gnawed at her, the implications carrying a sense of foreboding that hinted at risks yet unseen. Humans were notoriously unpredictable, but Elias's composed demeanor and sharp wit from the previous night hinted at a deeper and more calculated strategy. She entered the council chamber just as the session began, slipping silently into her designated seat. The room was a study in gravitas, with its arched crystalline ceilings and a dais that glowed faintly with the collective energy of Thyralian wisdom. Around the circular table, the council members regarded Elias with a mix of curiosity and guarded suspicion. The human, clad in a crisp formal uniform, stood with his hands behind his back, the picture of disciplined confidence. "Captain Ward," the High Chancellor intoned, his voice resonating with an authority born of centuries. "You requested this audience. Speak your purpose." Elias inclined his head respectfully. "Honorable councillors," he began, his tone calm and measured, "I wish to address the security provisions surrounding the proposed alliance. Specifically, I believe there are vulnerabilities that must be mitigated if our union is to serve its intended purpose." Kaelira's stomach tightened, a wave of apprehension coursing through her. What was his true intention behind this bold move? The Council's security protocols were sacrosanct, their meticulous planning the pride of Thyralian governance. To question them was bold, reckless, even. She studied Elias's expression, searching for signs of arrogance or hubris, but found none. Instead, his face held a quiet determination. "Explain," the High Chancellor said, his antennae twitching ever so slightly, the only outward sign of his intrigue. Elias stepped forward, activating a holodisplay that illuminated the center of the chamber. A series of diagrams and tactical overlays materialized, depicting trade routes, diplomatic outposts, and potential conflict zones. "As you can see," Elias continued, "the current patrol schedules leave several critical points underprotected. These vulnerabilities could be exploited by hostile factions, jeopardizing not only Thyralian interests but the broader stability of our regions." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Kaelira's mind raced. How had he obtained such detailed knowledge of their operations? Had he studied their systems overnight? No, the precision in his presentation suggested a much deeper familiarity. "And your proposed solution?" asked Councillor Delin, a stern-faced elder whose voice carried the weight of skepticism. Elias gestured to the hologram, which shifted to display alternative patrol patterns and resource allocations. By reallocating assets here and here, he said, pointing to 2 key sectors, we can cover the gaps without straining existing resources. Additionally, integrating human reconnaissance drones would provide enhanced early warning capabilities. Kaelira's breath hitched. The human was proposing to incorporate Earth's military technology into Thyralian defense systems. It was an audacious move, one that would undoubtedly provoke heated debate. Your analysis is thorough, the High Chancellor conceded. But why bring this to our attention now? Surely such matters could have been addressed post-alliance. Elias's gaze swept the room, his blue eyes steady and unflinching. Because waiting would be a mistake. If our alliance is to succeed, it must begin on a foundation of trust and mutual investment. Delaying these discussions risks undermining that foundation. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the council like a tangible force. Kaelira's thoughts wrestled between frustration and reluctant admiration. The uneasy mixture of doubt and intrigue that followed left her unsettled. Part of her was impressed by his foresight and initiative, another part bristled at the presumptive nature of his actions. And yet, she couldn't deny the logic in his argument. His boldness, though unconventional, was not without merit. As the council deliberated, Kaelira's gaze lingered on Elias. There was no mistaking his resolve. This was a man accustomed to taking risks, to pushing boundaries in pursuit of his goals. She had underestimated him, she realized. The human wasn't simply a soldier playing a diplomat's role, he was a strategist, and a formidable one at that. The session concluded with the council agreeing to review Elias's proposals in detail. As the chamber emptied, Kaelira approached him, her steps deliberate. "Captain Ward," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You've certainly given the council much to consider." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I only seek to ensure the alliance serves its purpose, Princess. Peace is a fragile thing. It requires vigilance. And boldness, apparently," she replied, unable to keep the edge from her tone. "You took a great risk addressing the council in this manner. What if they had dismissed you outright?" Elias's lips quirked in a faint smile. "Then I would have found another way. But I believe in being direct. It saves time." Kaelira studied him for a moment, her frustration tempered by a reluctant respect. Directness is not always well received in Thyralian politics. "You should be cautious." "Noted," he said, inclining his head. "But I suspect subtlety isn't what drew the council to consider this alliance. They need results, and that's what I aim to deliver." She couldn't argue with that, though it irked her to admit it. Elias Ward was proving to be an enigma, a man who defied expectations at every turn. He was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve, yet she couldn't ignore the growing sense that their fates were inextricably linked. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. By evening, Kaelira found herself once again on the balcony of her chambers, the city lights casting a soft glow over her contemplative expression. Her mind replayed the events of the day, Elias's words echoing in her thoughts. Trust and mutual investment. Was such a foundation truly possible between their peoples? Her thoughts shattered as a commotion erupted in the courtyard below, the sharp clang of metal ringing out amidst the chaotic shuffle of feet and frantic shouts. The acrid smell of smoke began to waft upward, adding to the scene's urgency. Kaelira leaned over the balustrade, her sharp eyes catching the flicker of movement. Guards surrounded a figure cloaked in shadows, their voices raised in alarm. Before she could call for Violin, a deafening explosion rocked the air, sending a shockwave that rattled the very foundations of the palace. Kaelira's heart pounded as she turned and sprinted toward the corridor, her mind racing. The alliance negotiations had just taken a dark and dangerous turn, and she could only hope that Elias Ward's boldness would be enough to face the storm that was now upon them. Alarms screamed through the palace, their shrill tones cutting through the chaos as guards shouted orders and thick, acrid smoke filled the air, clawing at every breath. Kaelira raced through the hallways, her ceremonial gown whipping behind her, its intricate embroidery snagging against doorframes as she pushed forward in a desperate flight. Guards shouted orders, their boots pounding against the polished floors as they scrambled to secure the building. The explosion had been no accident, that much was clear. Someone had dared to attack the seat of the Thyralian Empire on the eve of its most critical alliance. Kaelira reached the command center, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was alive with activity, holographic displays projecting images of the palace's exterior and nearby sectors. Vylan stood at the center, his features taut with controlled urgency, his antennae twitching as he issued commands. He turned as she entered, his antennae quivering slightly. "Princess," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "We have confirmed hostiles in the eastern quadrant. They infiltrated the outer defenses and detonated an explosive near the central courtyard." Kaelira's fists clenched. "Do we know who they are?" Vylan hesitated, then gestured to a nearby hologram. The image shifted to show a group of figures clad in dark, angular armor. Their movements were precise, coordinated, a stark contrast to the chaos they had unleashed. "We suspect they are members of the Void Claw," Vylan said. "A rogue faction known for targeting intergalactic alliances." Kaelira's breath hitched. The Void Claw, a name spoken in hushed, fearful tones, was rebellion incarnate, a defiant rejection of unity. Their presence here was not just an attack on the Thyralian Empire but a statement against the partnership with humanity. "Where is Captain Ward?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "He's already deployed," Vylan replied. "He took command of a response team and is engaging the intruders near the eastern gate." Kaelira's chest tightened. Elias Ward's decisiveness was both reassuring and troubling. She had no doubt he could hold his own, but this was unfamiliar territory for a human. Thyralian tactics and Void Claw's methods were unlike anything Earth had faced. She turned to Vylan. "Send a contingent to support him. I want updates every 5 minutes." Vylan inclined his head. "As you command, Princess." As the command center buzzed with activity, Kaelira moved to a quieter corner, activating her personal comms device. Her fingers trembled as she activated the comms device, the silence that followed amplifying her pounding heartbeat and conjuring vivid fears of Elias falling into enemy hands. Frustration bubbled within her. What was he thinking, charging into battle without consulting her? Did he not understand the stakes? Minutes stretched into an eternity before a response crackled through her earpiece. "Ward here." "Captain," Kaelira said, her tone a mixture of relief and admonishment. "What is your status?" "Holding the line," Elias replied, his voice calm despite the sound of gunfire in the background. "The Void Claw brought heavy ordnance, but they're not as organized as they look. We've managed to push them back toward the outer perimeter." Kaelira's grip on the comms device tightened. "You should have waited for reinforcements. This is not your fight to handle alone. With respect, Princess, it's my fight the moment it threatens our alliance," Elias said firmly. "I'm not here to sit on the sidelines." His words stung, though she couldn't deny their truth. Kaelira's frustration softened as she recalled Elias's unwavering resolve, the clarity in his eyes when he spoke of duty and the risks he willingly embraced. "Very well," she said. "But be careful, Captain. I will not have this alliance jeopardized by reckless heroics." Elias's chuckle crackled through the comms. "Noted. Ward out." The connection ended, leaving Kaelira staring at the blank screen. Her emotions warred within her: admiration for his courage, irritation at his impulsiveness, and an undercurrent of fear for what might happen if he failed. Time dragged on as reports filtered in. The Void Claw's forces were relentless, their attacks pushing the palace's defenses to their limits. Kaelira paced the command center, her thoughts a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. She hated being sidelined, forced to rely on others while the fate of her people hung in the balance. Finally, a new report came through. "Princess," a guard said, his tone urgent. "Captain Ward has broken through their lines and captured one of their commanders. He's requesting an audience with you immediately." Kaelira's eyes widened, her pulse quickening. "Bring him to the interrogation chamber," she commanded, her voice sharp with urgency. "I'll be there shortly." When she arrived, Elias was already waiting, his uniform streaked with soot and blood. Despite the disarray, his presence was as commanding as ever. Beside him, A Void Claw operative knelt, bound and defiant. "This one's a talker," Elias said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "But I thought you'd want the honors, Princess." Kaelira stepped forward, her gaze piercing the captive. "Why attack us?" she demanded. "What does the Void Claw gain by sabotaging peace?" The operative sneered. "Peace is a lie. Unity is a cage. Your alliance will only strengthen the chains that bind us." Kaelira's jaw tightened. "And chaos is freedom." The prisoner's silence was answer enough. Elias stepped closer. "We need more than rhetoric. What are their next moves?" The operative's defiance faltered under his intense gaze, but he said nothing. Kaelira exchanged a look with Elias, a silent agreement passing between them. They would get their answers, one way or another. Hours later, with the immediate threat neutralized, Kaelira and Elias stood on the palace's highest balcony, overlooking the city. In the distance, fires smoldered against the darkened skyline, their faint glow accompanied by the acrid scent of burning metal and the occasional crackle of collapsing structures, etching the devastation into Kaelira's mind. "They'll come again," Elias said, breaking the silence. "Yes," Kaelira replied. "But next time, we'll be ready." He turned to her, his expression softer than she expected. "You held your ground today, Princess. Your people are lucky to have you." Kaelira's lips curved into a faint smile. "And humanity is lucky to have you, Captain. Perhaps this alliance stands a chance after all." For a moment, the weight of their responsibilities lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of camaraderie. It wouldn't last, the Void Claw's shadow loomed too large for that. But for now, it was enough. Faint embers from the Void Claw's attack glowed in the palace's outer courtyards, their heat lingering in the cool air, mingling with the acrid scent of charred stone. Repairs were underway, and the council had convened an emergency session to address the situation. Kaelira stood at the center of the chamber, her voice steady as she delivered her report. "Thanks to Captain Ward's swift action, we were able to prevent further destruction," she said, her gaze sweeping over the councillors. She caught Councillor Delin's firm nod, his usual skepticism replaced by a rare expression of respect, a sign of shifting tides within the room. "The Void Claw's operative has revealed critical intelligence that will aid us in dismantling their network. This alliance, though tested, has already proven its worth." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Kaelira could sense the shift in their demeanor, a tentative but growing trust in the human who had risked his life to defend their people. When the session concluded, Kaelira made her way to the infirmary. Elias sat on the edge of a medical bed, his uniform discarded in favor of a bandaged arm and a smirk that refused to fade. Despite the clear exhaustion in his eyes, he radiated a quiet satisfaction. "Princess," he said as she entered, inclining his head. "To what do I owe the honor?" Kaelira folded her arms, a faint smile softening her features as she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet triumph. The alliance was fragile, but for the first time, she felt the stirrings of genuine hope. "Checking on my ally. It seems humanity's famed resilience extends beyond the battlefield." Elias chuckled, though the movement clearly strained his injured shoulder. "We're stubborn, if nothing else. How's the council taking the news?" "Better than expected," Kaelira admitted. "Your actions have given them something they've long lacked, hope. Perhaps this alliance stands a chance after all." Elias's smirk softened into something more genuine. "Hope's a good place to start." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable but reflective, filled with unspoken acknowledgement of what they had endured. Kaelira finally broke it, her tone more personal. "You could have stayed back. Let my guards handle the situation." "Why didn't you?" Elias met her gaze, his blue eyes steady. "Because alliances aren't built on words alone. If we're going to make this work, it has to start with trust earned, not given. And if that means stepping into the line of fire, so be it." Kaelira's heart tightened, a mixture of admiration and something deeper stirring within her. "You've earned more than trust today, Captain. You've earned respect." He inclined his head, the gesture sincere. "Coming from you, Princess, that means a lot." In the days that followed, a joint operation uncovered a hidden Void Claw armory, its capture celebrated with shared cheers and mutual respect. Intelligence networks hummed with new leads, and patrols from both species fortified the palace's vulnerable points, their coordination a symbol of newfound unity. The Void Claw's intel led to the disruption of several planned attacks, and joint Thyralian human patrols began fortifying key sectors. The once fractured palace now buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. Kaelira and Elias often found themselves working side by side, their interactions marked by a growing camaraderie. Though their personalities clashed at times, her measured diplomacy and his blunt pragmatism, it became clear that their differences were complementary. Together, they embodied the potential of their alliance. On the eve of their formal union, Kaelira stood on the balcony of her chambers, gazing at the city below. The fires were long extinguished, replaced by the glow of lanterns and the hum of restored life. She heard the familiar sound of boots behind her and turned to find Elias approaching, now dressed in ceremonial attire. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, leaning casually against the balustrade. Kaelira shook her head. "Too much to think about. Tomorrow marks a new chapter for both our peoples. It's daunting." "You're not alone in this," Elias said, his tone quiet but firm. "Whatever challenges come our way, we face them together. That's the deal, right?" Kaelira's lips curved into a small smile. "Right." The city below shimmered with renewed life, lanterns casting warm light over bustling streets alive with the hum of voices and the rhythm of renewed trade. The fragile but growing unity they had fought to protect seemed almost tangible, woven into the fabric of the night. For the first time, Kaelira allowed herself to believe in the possibility of lasting peace. "Elias," she said softly, "I think we might actually pull this off." He glanced at her, his smirk returning. "We'll make it work. Stubbornness, remember?" Kaelira laughed, a sound that carried a note of genuine joy. In that moment, the weight of their shared burdens felt lighter. They were two individuals from vastly different worlds, but together, they were something stronger. And as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever the future held.